Joined now by Matt Continetti. Good morning, Matt. How are you?
I'm well, Hugh. How are you?
I'm great. You did a great piece for commentary on the decision by the Biden administration and Tony Blinken to walk away from Mike Pompeo's Commission on Unalienable Rights. And so I want to talk about that. But first, a little definitional clarity. You have to do in 2 minutes or less the difference between natural rights, natural law, unalienable rights, and human rights. Because this is where it all goes to hell, right?
I always feel like I'm taking a quiz when I appear on this show, Hugh. It's harder than a dissertation or oral examination. Now, natural rights, natural law. Look, I mean, Mike Pompeo had a very interesting idea when he was Secretary of State. Is he wanted to say we're party to all these human rights agreements, where we were the authors of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But what does human rights mean in the 21st century? And it was his view that it means less and less, and that the idea of human rights is disconnected from the inalienable rights, the rights connected to our person, our mind, our tongue, our ability to work, that are contained in the Declaration of Independence. So he chaired this, or he impaneled this amazing commission chaired by Marianne Glendon of Harvard, looking into what are human rights and how are they connected to the America's founding, and also how can they play a role in America's foreign policy, especially in our coming confrontation with China. It was a brilliant piece of work that the commission laid out. It didn't get much attention, but the human rights lobby, the international organizations, the UN, they hated it because they want to own this concept of human rights. And it was, I think, a small tragedy, one of many we've been experiencing in the Biden administration, when Tony Blinken basically said he repudiated that commission.
And the deal that Mike Pompeo was up to was trying to bring some clarity to the term. And I purposely began with natural rights, natural law, and unalienable or inalienable rights because we used to understand that when the Declaration was written, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness replaced life, liberty, and property in Locke's world, in Jefferson's world. But we kind of knew what it meant, and then due process came along in the rights-based constitutionalism of America. But human rights is amorphous, Matt. And you write about that in commentary. Human rights has become the Gumby of terms. It can be stretched into any kind of situation that the authors need servicing.
Yeah, it began, I think, with the idea that there are economic rights in addition to human rights, inalienable rights, and that is that for many centuries, human rights were understood as rights against government. That these were areas where government couldn't go. But in the 20th century, we began to understand human rights as also claims on the government, as things government would do for us, like health care or minimum income or all the things coming out of the Biden administration. And that, I think, began the muddle. And then, of course, human rights started edging into all of the new fashionable identity and sexual politics of the 21st century. And that too muddled the concept. So what I thought was very useful for Pompeo and Glendon, and they didn't do this in a biased way. They were just simply saying, what did human rights mean at the founding? And what it basically meant was limited government, freedom of religion, freedom of association, freedom of speech, and also the rights to labor, to work, and also enjoy the fruit of that labor. And I think when we look at how we can promote human rights in the world today, that's the basic concepts we need to understand. I also did
You know,
it in a
I,
way that wasn't very sectarian, and that's where I think when you mention natural law, that's where people start going, well, I'm not so sure. Is that tied up with specific religions or something like that? Talking about unalienable rights, I think, is a way that we can include more groups in this discussion.
yeah, if you crack that door open a little bit, the Summa Theologica comes in and sits on your desk. No, I think that the most important thing that they did, they were going to return property rights to the calculation and explain to people that the right to own and alienate property is actually fundamental to free societies. Matt, a sidebar. Marianne Glendon is a giant, a titan of American intellectual life. There aren't many like her or Robbie George. Is there a next generation Marianne Glendon, Robbie George? These are the people who, in my generation, we would look to buttress any argument or any commission. Who is it in your generation that serves that role?
Well, kind of in an in-between generation, Hugh, I think, is the director of the commission, Peter Berkowitz of the Hoover
Yes.
Institution, who definitely understands these things very well. And then closer to my generation, I think you can look to Ryan Anderson, the new president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, who clearly cares about human rights. He also cares very much about natural law, so he has that component as well. But he's thinking about some of these fundamental questions as well. But I'm glad that Mike Pompeo brought it up because human rights are not necessarily at the forefront of a lot of our discussions over the last 4 years, and especially now that Biden is trying to appropriate this concept for himself, we as conservatives need to understand where we come in on the issue.
Very quickly, Matt, I've been doing a lot of work on homelessness in LA. People now talk about a right to housing. That's the we care about the unhoused, but there is no natural right or unalienable right to housing, correct?
Not in my understanding of it, no, not in the traditional originalist understanding of what natural rights are. And this is the problem, is because the way that we talk about human rights now is completely tied up with the role of the state, the role of government. And the truth is, the government is not the best agency to provide many of these things that we are now claiming as human rights. That there are other ways to do it. By the way, it's not just the federal government; it's the local government or the community, neighborhood. When you all of a
It's
sudden you proclaim a right to one thing, you immediately assume the federal government's in charge, and I think that leads to bad outcomes.
We're over into the break, but we'll post the whole audio. That goes to subsidiarity, Matt. And our friend Archbishop Chaput has written a new book, Things Worth Dying For, all about subsidiarity and all about the need to defend natural rights. Do you think this is the key question, and we'll make sure everyone hears it? Do you think that there's any way to persuade a mass audience of what this means in these days? The framers understood it because they talked about it a lot and they were coming out of a variety of traditions that embraced it. But today, you know, you got to have some education in order to grasp these concepts.
You do, I mean, look, there's 47% of the country, I think, that definitely wants to have these concepts close to our thoughts about policy and our thoughts about principles. And when you look at not only the Commission on Unalienable Rights, but also the 1776 Commission, which also came out at the very end of the Trump administration, you do see there is an appetite for this return to the founding and the founding principles. And so, look, 47% isn't a majority, at least a political majority, but it's a start, and you have to start from somewhere. So I think we can build on the efforts from Mike Pompeo.
Agreed. Continetti, you follow him on Twitter at Continetti. Thank you, Matthew. Talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Hugh.